disagree with it for the reasons that my honourable friend, the Shadow Minister, gave. The grammar schools debate, I'm sure, is one that we will return to, but I want to focus in some brief remarks on supporting the new clauses proposed from the opposition front bench, because I think the case that my honourable friend made is a very, very powerful one. And it's about looking at the evidence of what has actually worked in this country and in other parts of the world. When I intervened on my honourable friend earlier, I spoke about our experience in government with the London Challenge. And I want to talk a little bit about the London Challenge, because I think it does show a different way of doing things to the one which the present government is following. Academies actually started in London, and we had a number of academies that were created as part of the London Challenge. I am very proud to this day of those academies that we created in London, in places like Hackney, that have been badly let down by the education system in the past. And I celebrate the success of schools like Mossbourne and many others across London that have done so well as academies. But we know that the evidence now on academies is mixed. And I think we just have to acknowledge that. In Liverpool, the schools that are struggling the most at secondary level are the sponsored academies. Now, I don't therefore condemn them for being academies, but I recognise that they have big, big challenges. They tend to serve some of the areas of greatest social and economic need in the city. Simply making them academies didn't on its own ensure that those schools would be transformed and do brilliantly well. And that is why I welcome very warmly, in particular, New Clause 1 that my honourable friend has put forward, because the approach that was taken in the London Challenge, very much under the inspirational leadership of Tim Brighouse, was to look at the evidence, was to broker relationships between different schools in London, to recognise the diversity of social and economic conditions in different communities across London, and not to have a kind of one-size-fits-all approach. So on academies, I, as the Minister, spoke to local government leaders in London at the time, some of which were Labour, but many of which were Liberal Democrat or Conservative at that time, and there were different views about academies. So in local authority areas in London like Camden and Tower Hamlets, which simply didn't want to have academies, we didn't take the view that that should be imposed. And in fact, in both those cases, we've seen real improvement in schools over recent decades. Other authorities like Hackney, like Southwark, like Lambeth were more open to the creation of academies, and that was part of the route that we pursued. What I really welcome about the new clause that my honourable friend has put forward, New Clause 1, is that it recognises that you have to take a sophisticated approach that looks at all of the evidence. Data is really, really important, and I never have any truck with those who suggest that you can simply ignore the data about a school, but data is only one aspect of the judgment that we have to make. You do have to look at context. You do have to look at progress, as the government itself has acknowledged, the actual value that is being added by the school. You have to look at the history of the school, and I think crucially, you have to look at the quality of leadership and the quality of teaching and learning that's happening in the school. I think the emphasis on that in the proposed new clause is hugely, hugely welcome. I would urge the government to really reconsider this approach that is so highly centralised from London, that doesn't take into account sufficiently concerns in local communities, and that regards academy status as somehow the be-all and end-all, when the reality is that we've got some great successes from academies, but we've got some wonderful schools that have chosen not to go down that route. And we should celebrate those schools equally. Ministers should visit those schools equally, and their role in our education system in raising standards for all should be celebrated by all of us on a cross-party basis. I look at the primary schools in my constituency in West Derby in Liverpool, many of which do an absolutely fantastic job. I've spoken previously of a school in Norris Green, which has one of the highest levels of deprivation in the country, Ranworth Square School, which consistently delivers really good results for the children at 11. They're not an academy, they have fantastic leadership, they work well with other schools, they work with the local authority. I don't think changing that school's status would make any fundamental difference. Why does the school succeed? Great leadership, great teaching, great relationships with the community and with other schools. Sometimes the change that comes through academy status can be transformational. I referred to some of the brilliant examples in London, and I think they're really important that we remind ourselves of them. The final thing that I want to say is a lot of analysis has been done of the London Challenge, and it wasn't all good, it wasn't all successful, but the main feature of the analyses that I've seen, and I'd certainly concur with this, is that London Challenge worked because it was collaborative and based on evidence. It was collaborative across schools, it was collaborative across communities, local authorities were involved, but the schools were very much in the driving seat, working with us in central government. And I think we need that kind of approach. You can't replicate something that worked in a capital city in every part of the country. We need that kind of approach elsewhere. And that is why, as I mentioned earlier, the Mayor of Liverpool, Joe Anderson, and the Cabinet Member, Nick Small, have decided that we're going to have a Liverpool challenge. They've asked me to chair it. I'm going to be working with schools, working with business, working with the Further Education College, the universities and others. And this will be across the piece. So academy schools, local authority schools, faith schools and the church schools are a particularly important component of education in the city. And the aim is absolutely about raising standards for all young people in the schools. We've seen a big improvement in many of our cities, including Liverpool, over the last 2 decades, but we have seen in our secondary results in recent years a drop-off, Liverpool falling a bit behind some of the other cities. The Mayor of Liverpool has recognised that and has asked for this piece of work to happen. I mention it because I think that kind of approach still has value. And that is an approach that I'll give way in a moment. That is an approach that is rooted